Hi, we're here with Doug Turnbull today. How you doing, Doug?
I'm doing just fine. How are you doing?
Good. And congrats on doing a presentation at the Mars Society conference.
Well, thank you very much. It was a lot of fun. It's the first conference I've been to, and uh, I was expecting, because a friend of mine did a presentation a couple of years ago, and she only had, I was expecting 6 or 8 people at the presentation, and instead the room was packed. It was standing room only. There must have been 50 or 60 people there. So it was really quite exciting, and I got to meet several of the Mars One candidates who were also in attendance, and uh, quite a few people. Several of the people like Casey Dreyer and Art Harmon and people that I had interviewed on NPR, I had never actually physically met them, so that was kind of nice.
Awesome. Yeah. So, um, my NPR. That's your podcast, Mars Pirate Radio, right?
Exactly, yes, Mars Pirate Radio.
Awesome.
I also set up a vendor table and gave away a bunch of what do you call review copies. They've still got a few typos and things in them uh, of my newest book, and then I sold a few of my older books as well. So it was a fun trip, kind of a long one, but it was fun.
Awesome. So, for your presentation, how did you decide on the topic of food for Mars explorers and settlers?
Well, that's kind of almost by accident. Uh, Over the years, as I've interviewed people and studied uh, Mars exploration and various proposals for Mars exploration, since most of my science fiction stories involve that, uh, the the subject of food doesn't seem to be really high on anybody's list of what's important. Well, it's real important if you don't have it. And I also figured, well, sure, we can ship it all from Earth, just like we do to the ISS, but that's not only expensive. That kind of food, which is would have to be probably freeze dried, kind of the modern version of a TV dinner, would get old after a while. Steady. I mean, just think if you were going to live your entire life eating nothing but that kind of food, to get pretty boring. So it occurred to me that they're gonna have to grow some food in situ in place, and that's what I postulated in my books, like The Man Who Conquered Mars and so forth. They always had a greenhouse where they grew vegetables and things like that. So the uh, the upshot of the article is that what are some of the various options that are available so that they can actually prepare their own food, grow it, and prepare it there on Mars. Because if you're going to have a long-term exploratory mission or a permanent settlement, you're just really going to want to do it that way. That's how I've got it figured. And I did notice that while Mars One kind of alludes to it, they never got really specific about exactly how they planned on growing their food. So I made some proposals in this presentation as to various techniques that could be used.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so as far as the greenhouse goes, what options for producing the food do you think would work best? Um,
Well, there's several, and I touched on them in the presentation. First of all, it won't be a traditional greenhouse in that right now we don't really have the physical capability of building one that would be airtight. It'll most likely be a garden that's in the habitat itself and lit by LED type lighting for the plants and so forth. There's several possibilities. One of them is hydroponics, which is a very efficient way of growing vegetables and things like that, because they you only use the nutrients and fertilizer and water that's the plants are actually using. And since you're recycling, if you've got a setup like the ISS has, and you're recycling 90% of your water, then the really it doesn't require a lot of extra water to have that type of garden, and you can produce things. For example, there is a hydroponic farm in Japan that they built in an old Sony plant that covers about 1 acre, the size of a football field. And because they use stacking, they stack these little gardens together, and they're almost like pallets in a warehouse, and they're lit with LED lighting, which is much more efficient than the more traditional type lighting. They actually produce 10,000 heads of lettuce a day.
Wow.
And that's on 1 acre, which gives you an idea of how hydroponics increases the efficiency of vegetable produce and so forth. Now, if you take hydroponics and you team it up with aquaculture, you end up with what's called aquaponics. And that's where you have fish or aquatic life that produces phosphates and nitrogen and so forth in their waste. And you use that water to irrigate your crop so that the whole system sort of recycles itself. The crop itself is being grown in kind of a gravel-like medium, which there'll be no shortage of that on Mars. And the water that comes off of the plants after they're done with it has been purified, because those waste products have been filtered out, because the plants use them to make to grow the vegetables. So that water is then recirculated right back into the fish tank, and the whole system is kind of semi-closed. You only have to, the amount of inputs are fairly modest, because most of the output, a good portion of, for example, the vegetable matter, you can grow certain vegetables specifically as feed for the fish. And so then you'll also be able to harvest the fish occasionally, and other aquatic life. And I know a couple of people that are doing this kind of as a hobby, and they've been quite successful at it, because they've discovered all of the pitfalls, made all the mistakes, and now they have working systems. And it's actually been done commercially in California. There's one in Santa Cruz, there's one in the Napa Valley, that are selling vegetables in the local greengrocers, and they're really very it's a very practical way of doing things. In fact, there's a company here in Kentucky, his name escapes me right at the moment, that is in the process of manufacturing a small farm that can be used in eastern Kentucky to grow basically catfish and vegetables for the local markets there, because regular agriculture is impossible in eastern Kentucky. It's very hilly. You're either going up or you're going down, and the only flat spots are in the bottomland, which are subject to flooding. So there really isn't any significant agriculture above the garden-sized level in that part of the country. And this would allow vegetables that they're now, say, importing from California to be grown right there. There's some tremendous advantages to it. And that type of technology, the good news about it is that both hydroponics and aquaponics are existing technology. You don't really have to invent anything new to take it to Mars with you. You just have to modify the technology that you already have to apply it to the new situation. And that's the essence of my whole thinking when it comes to how we're going to settle on Mars in the near future. The only way to do it is to make all of your plans based on technology as it exists today. It's things that are tried and true that we know will work, and that's the stuff we ought to take with us. And you know, as time goes on, other things will be developed, but for now, I would stick with things like this, like hydroponics and aquaponics, where there's a body of knowledge and experience already out there on how to do it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was pretty detailed. Thanks.
There are some other alternatives that I discussed that are a little different, and they're kind of nascent technologies right now. One of them is generating meat artificially. They grow it in a growth medium, and they basically like a pig or a cow. Instead of killing them, all you do is they donate a few stem cells, and you use that to start growing, and you grow. It's really interesting because the guy was essentially growing a pork chop, and this is being done in Holland, and using stem cells as the starting point. And now that's pretty interesting. And then I also, for another source of vegetable matter that is fairly low maintenance, are fungi and mushrooms, you know, that type of thing. And they'll grow on almost anything. They'll grow on your garbage. They don't require that they be kept at a constant temperature, because right now they grow in caves and old mines where it's cool, and they grow in the dark. So it's a fairly low energy, low maintenance supplement to your diet. And the other possibility that I discussed in the talk was insects, using them as a source of animal protein. And because they're so very efficient in converting cellulose and plant material into protein. For example, a grasshopper can take 10 grams of vegetable matter and convert it into 9 grams of animal protein. A cow, on the other hand, takes 10 grams of vegetable matter to produce 1 gram of protein. Obviously, the bugs are a lot more efficient. They're not very appetizing to the Western mind, but there are countries where they're considered a delicacy. Grasshoppers, for example.
Yeah, I have joked about 1,001 ways to make grasshoppers edible.
And the good thing about them is that they'll eat almost anything, which means that if, you know, I did make this point that if you're going to have them, you have to make sure that their farm, their grazing land is kept separate from the garden, because you don't want them getting into your garden. Because they will eat anything. And so what you have to do is find out what is the most efficient feed for the grasshoppers, or whichever bug you're going to use as your protein source, and grow that, and you'll grow it as kind of a grazing land for the animals. And let's see, did I have something else? I'm trying to think. It seems to me there was. We did the artificial meat.
Yeah, 3D printed. 3D
Pardon
printed
me?
food. Yeah.
Oh yes, there's the 3D printing. I'd forgotten about that. And that's a complex idea, but and as one of the 3D printer experts that was there it's always good to meet these people, because they know so much more than I do. And he pointed out, he said, you still have to have the same ingredient. If you're going to 3D print hamburger, you're going to have the same basic ingredients as what goes into hamburger in order to get hamburger coming out the other side. It doesn't miraculously turn sawdust into hamburger. But that's a possibility of creating customized food using maybe some basic materials. And so, you know, maybe it's a way of taking grasshopper, you know, you grind it up and put it in a 3D printer, and it ends up producing a steak for you. Could be, I don't know. That's a possibility. But anyway, that's still, it's being experimented with, and they've actually produced some hamburger with using that technique. But I haven't seen, you know, any. I haven't seen any of it marketed as yet, and that'll tell a tale. But I do think, and this is an important point, that that this type of farming and meat production and this type of technology is going to emerge in this century, because more and more people are becoming disgusted with the industrial model of what passes for animal husbandry these days. You know, the way cattle are treated and hogs and chickens are treated is just appalling, and it makes you feel guilty having your pork chop. If there was a way to do this just by them donating some stem cells, that would be really cool. Then, I mean, you'd have a few of them there, and that'd be the end of it. Of course, the people within that business currently wouldn't be too happy about it, but I expect there'll always be an upscale market for the, quote, real thing, unquote. But generating artificial meat might be a good alternative to that, the current method, which is very inefficient. And similarly, the hydroponic gardens, there's one in New York, Gotham Greens it's called, which has a huge greenhouse in Brooklyn. And, you know, they've used one of those, I forget what they call them. I think they call them gray zones or something. Anyway, it's a place where an old factory was, and nobody wants it. And so they built a greenhouse there, and they grow vegetables for local distribution. Well, of course, one of the advantages to that is that, number one, you can sell the vegetables as being fresh, just harvested today. It doesn't get any fresher than that. And number two, there's very little transportation cost involved. You're not shipping it clear across you're not shipping it from the Imperial Valley to Brooklyn. You're already in Brooklyn. And if you're going to ship it from the Imperial Valley, a tomato, you're going to have to pick it when it's semi-green. Otherwise, it'll be rotten by the time it makes it to Brooklyn. So it's got to ripen off the vine, which takes away an awful lot of the flavor. It's why those little round jobs that you buy in the grocery store now don't taste very good. It's because of that. They're all picked at the same time. They're picked mechanically, and they're generally picked when they're still hard enough that they can stand handling and shipping. And that's just this does away with all of that. And so I'm, you know, and it also makes use of land that otherwise isn't being used in the cities. So I'm kind of talking your leg off on the food thing, but as I got into answer your first question, as I got into this and started exploring the possibilities, this is the things that I've discovered over the years. And so I just kind of figured, well, this is something I actually know a little bit about, and so that's what I'll talk about. Because most of the people at that convention were, I mean, they were plasma physicists and rocket scientists and people like that. Well, heck, I'm just a science fiction writer who has done a little bit of research on this subject. So I'm not an expert in anything, but I can quote a few experts.
Of course. So what do you expect out of Mars exploration going forward from here?
Well, I'm hopeful that Mars One or some version of Mars One, I don't know whether the existing structure, the foundation as it exists today, will end up being the final one. It depends on how well the managers manage things. And to be honest, to my mind, they haven't done a very good job to date. They haven't been utilizing their what I consider their strongest resource, which are the volunteers themselves, because they're convinced and they're driven and they're all capable and knowledgeable people. Every one of them that I've talked to has been somebody I would not mind taking with me if I were going to Mars. And so I don't think they're fully utilizing that resource. Excuse me. But I do think that some version of Mars One, the one-way trip, is going to be the preferred method of going to Mars. Now, whether there'll be an exploratory mission that goes to Mars and lands and then returns, I don't know. I am doubtful that that model is a good one, because for one thing, if you have an expedition, and it should be largely scientists, if that's what it is, a scientific mission, you're not going to get any of them to leave once they're there. Why would they come back here? They are the world's most prominent geologists and chemists and atmospheric scientists in the whole world, because they are the only ones on Mars. I doubt very much if you could pry them out of there once they're there. So it's not really a hard sell. The one-way trip isn't really a hard sell at all. Probably should have some sort of return vessel for something, some use, but I just don't see why the whole mission has to come back. I mean, if you're going to have a scientific station on Mars, just leave your scientists there. They're they'll still have access to the internet. It won't be the kind that we have, because they'll be back to emails because of the time delay factor. But even so, our ability to communicate now is very good, as our control of Pathfinder and Opportunity and Curiosity has proven. So that's how I see it. There's a couple of possibilities, and I do think that what's eventually going to emerge, purely because of the economics, will be the permanent colony, simply because that's where you're going to get the money. It costs less. There's less risk involved in terms of rockets are like airliners. 99% of the crashes that occur in commercial air travel happen during takeoff or landing. It's mid-flight's not dangerous at all. So the more times that you do takeoffs and landings, the more danger you're in. And the same goes with spacecraft. The most dangerous times are during atmospheric braking and during takeoff, during launch, ascent, when the rockets are firing. And in between time, there's nothing to it. You're just coasting along. And so the one-way mission has the advantage of having only one launch and one landing. And that's it. So the amount of risk involved is at least half. The amount of risk of loss of the mission is at least half doing it one way than it is doing a two-way mission. So there's some real positives to doing the one-way model.
Awesome. So with Mars Pirate Radio, what kind of guests do you have coming up?
Well, let's see. Dr. Zubrin has agreed to come on the show again. I had him a couple of years ago. And of course, I had you on the show a couple of years ago also. I
remember that.
You were one of my first guests from the Mars One candidates. And so I've got Ryan McDonald has agreed to an interview, but he's pretty busy right now. He just started his PhD program at, I think it's Cambridge or Oxford or one of those places. And so I'll just have to catch up with him. and but he's already agreed to it. He's reviewed his questions and so forth. And Lucinda Ofer from the Mars Society, who's the executive officer. She kind of does the managing part of the Mars Society. Dr. Zubrin's the president and one of the founding members. And she did a really interesting presentation on women on a Mars mission and how they fit into the program. It's very interesting. So we'll get a chance to talk about that. Let me see who else is on my list. I should have been ready for you, but anyway, I have a few guests lined up, and I'm really looking forward to the interviews because everybody always seems to be very interesting, and they always know more than I do, which is not too hard, but it's good. That's why I have guests, because I can't know everything, and I run out of ideas after a while. So I've heard quite a few good things from quite a few people about their thoughts on how these sorts of things ought to come down. Trying to think, I think I had a couple of other people I was talking to also. Oh, Carl C. Carlson, who is the co-author of a book called "In the Shadow of Ares," that was written a couple of years ago, several years ago, and I reviewed it. And he's agreed to come on because he and his partner are writing a new book, a new Mars book. So he's already agreed and so forth. We haven't nailed down exactly the time and so forth. So those are some of the upcoming guests, and I'm hoping to get more. I've sent out feelers to a lot of other people, and I'm hoping to get some more guests because they're always interesting, and you always come away knowing more than you did when you started.
Of course, and you mentioned you're a science fiction writer too.
Oh yes, I have several novels and a newly released novel. The one that sells the most is The Man Who Conquered Mars. It was the first one I wrote, and the basic formula for it is that it is a one that it takes place in the 2050s. So there's an established Mars colony, but it was put in place using the one-way technique, which I'm not going to accuse Lansdorp of stealing the idea because it's not a new idea, but I do think it's kind of neat that the formula that I postulated in the book is now coming into some acceptance. At first, you remember just a couple of years ago, everybody dismissed it as ridiculous. Well, they're not anymore. And I mean, even Dr. Zubrin dismissed back when I did the first interview with him, and now he's on the advisory board of the Mars One Foundation. So a lot of people have come on board, and the question now is making it work, not whether it's feasible or sensible to do it that way. It's how are we going to make it work, and how are we going to raise the money, that sort of thing. I envision there being a lot of sponsors, lots of them. You're going to have to actively go out and get them. And there'll be people who, just like your NASCAR drivers that have patches all over them, and their cars are covered with signs from Pennzoil and everybody else that is part of their sponsorship, Goodyear and so forth. Whoever makes something for the Mars One mission is going to want the publicity of that because they can use that and in advertising. If you're making the food, if you're making special dinners for the Mars astronauts, you're going to be able to market those here based on this is astronaut food. You're not old enough to remember the Tang, which is an instant drink was originally developed for the space program, and they used that to the hilt as an advertising ploy back when it was first released commercially. And so there'll be those kind of sponsors. There'll also be like Lansdorp originally planned, the TV rights and reality TV type thing. Although the revenues there are going to be limited, there'll be money, and it'll also help boost the whole idea that this is a real deal and it's worthy of your attention and investment. And then the final one, which to me is the biggest one, you're going to have some universities and other foundations that are going to say, wow, this outfit is really going to go to Mars here in 3 or 4 years. And they are going to want to get on board so that you will do their experiments for them. And they will give you money to do that. Some of these universities are very well endowed. They can afford to invest in this. So these are all private sources of money that can be used. And the key to making it work is Mars One, or whoever does this, is going to have to establish itself as legitimate, as the real deal. We are really doing this. And then once people believe that, they'll get behind it. They'll invest in it. And the analogy I use is that in the early days of when they were going to build the Transcontinental Railroad, they had the founders of Union Pacific and the founders of Southern Pacific, which were Southern Pacific built it from the west, Union Pacific from the east, had trouble selling this idea. Sounded, this is fantastic. You've got all these mountains and deserts and everything. Can't be done. Eventually, they were able to dispel those doubts and get investors, even though the guy that ran Union Pacific actually looks like he sold about twice as many shares as there actually existed. He was kind of a fraudster, but they ended up building the railroad, and that's the key. And here, it's the same thing. You have to convince people that it can be done, because at first it sounds impossible. But when you examine it carefully, you realize that it isn't impossible. And in fact, it's quite feasible. And so, and when they do that, you're going to have something to market. And one of there'll be sponsorships and things like that. There'll be some prestige to market. But this brings up another subject, which is going to be touchy for a lot of people. I think you're going to be selling Mars real estate, because I mean, you're there. You've got the first claim on it. Just like going west, same thing. You've got you're there. You stake your claim, and somebody says, "Well, I want the mining rights here in where in a certain section where they know there probably is some materials that are worth mining," and they're willing to invest in that because they know that whatever they pay for it today is going to seem like a bargain 10, 20, 30 years from now, when the Mars colony grows and becomes an economic force of its own. And that's the essential part about it. Right now, people think, well, what are they going to do on Mars that they can bring back here? Well, probably not a whole lot, other than intellectual property, that type of thing, knowledge. But it was the same thing when we settled North America. How much is North America worth now? And would you have invested in it, 400 years ago? Well, a few pennies 400 years ago would have turned into an awful lot. Now, what did they pay? They paid the Indians $11 for Manhattan. Pretty good investment when you think about it. Whatever you may think of the ripoff that it was, that's the kind of investment that we'd be selling, and because you're going to need some cash and those kind of investments. And also the legitimacy will get the other space agencies on board as well. They're going to want to be in on this. Companies like SpaceX, you know, it's going to be a big feather in their cap if they're the ones that are supplying the lift rockets. You know, Roscosmos, same thing. Excuse me. Whoever is doing this, it's kind of an in-kind contribution they can make. They give you a real discount in return for the fact that they can claim that they're the ones. They did this. Lockheed Martin didn't do this. We did this. You know, and that's a big selling point. Because space, particularly space in low Earth orbit, and possibly to the moon, is going to be. It's going to start getting busy over the years. And companies, you know, like the one Elon Musk has, that's what they're looking at. There's, you know, Elon's not running a charity. He's doing that because he intends to make money. And he knows that the way to make money is not just selling rocket delivery to NASA. The way to make money is to do it commercially and sell a product to somebody who's willing to pay for it. That's how I see it. Did I answer your question, or did I wander off?
Slight wander off, but that's all right. That's about all I've got. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me on, and I appreciate it, and I'll do it anytime you're interested. How long did we talk?
Close to half an hour, I think.
I see. Okay. Well, everybody's probably tired of hearing me talk anyway. So.
Oh, it was interesting.
Well, yeah. Thank you so much. And I see you have a better camera than you used to have. Everything seems to be working better.
Yeah, I think I've got a better light source mostly.
Well, I'm glad you could hear me this time. When we tried it the first time, I have no idea what was not working, but I'm using the same camera and microphone. But anyway, well, let me know when you've decided, when you got it edited and whatnot, and you decide to post it. Why, do you edit these beforehand?
No, I think I edited like one video that got messed up, but usually they're all right.
Okay. Well, I'll let you go then, and I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to promo Mars Pirate Radio.
Thank you.